Good morning and welcome to Kimmel Bay vlog once more, where we're looking at 100 essential passages in the Bible. And we've come today to the book of Ruth. I just got a new version of the Bible, the Message, and read the book together. It's only 4 chapters. Oh, what a wonderful way to get an overview of this jewel amongst the books in the Old Testament. It comes as a jewel in a very dark setting at the end of Judges, the book that precedes it. The very last verse of Judges, it says, "In those days Israel had no king. Everyone did as he saw fit. No rule of law. People doing everything that they thought was right in their own eyes." And yet here, sandwiched between Judges and Samuel, where people had stopped listening to God, we see the book of Ruth. And the jewel isn't only the book. The jewel is the heroine, the woman Ruth, a kind, a loving, faithful young lady, an example of purity, an example of faithfulness and courage. Tremendous joy to read her story. Do you know, as I read it again, it just reminded me that just as Ruth in the midst of darkness brought light and joy, so in even the darkest of situations, we can still see beauty. Even in lockdown, where our hearts maybe are closed in and some of us are beset by sadness, do you know, our heart can be free. We can still treat others with kindness. We can still pray that knows no geographical boundaries. And as we see disease and feel sadness as family members are affected or friends, do you know, grass is still growing through the pavement. The daffodils are coming out. Have you seen them? Even in the midst of a dark background, we can still turn towards the beautiful and be thankful. It wasn't easy for Ruth. She'd married a man. She lived in the land of Moab, and she'd married a man who had come over from Bethlehem. He'd come over with his brother, his parents, Naomi, Elimelech, and they married. But do you know, 10 years later, 10 years after being married, no children, he dies. His brother dies. His father dies, 3 of them. So Naomi, the mother-in-law, and Ruth are left alone. Such sadness, much like today. Such sadness, and it's too much for Naomi. She says in verse 13 of chapter 1, "It's so bitter, the Lord's hand has gone against me. I am embittered with what's happening." And you know, you don't blame her, really. It would have been such a hard time for her. Such sadness, losing her husband, her 2 sons in a foreign land. And you know, we need to take time to work through sadness, to express our grief. I remember a man that worked with me in the early days of Kimmel Bay Church, Dr. Jones, Dr. John Jones, his father, in fact, Dr. Goddard Jones, his father, in fact, had been one of the early founders of Kimmel Bay Church. And Dr. Jones, he had written a condolence card to a member of the church who showed it to me. And it said these simple words, "Do you know, we still grieve, but not as those that have no hope." We grieve, we feel sadness, but not as those that have no hope. Tremendous hope for those of us that love God. And Ruth found that. As Naomi returns to her land, returns to Bethlehem, Ruth stays close to her. "No, I'm not staying in Moab," she says. "Don't urge me to leave you, Naomi, or to turn back." Chapter 1, verse 16, "Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God." Ruth, she stays close to Naomi, her mother-in-law. She maintains contact. "I will go with you to your land," she says, "because your God is my God." She takes her faith as her own, and she finds grounding in this. In an insecure world where so much we don't understand, we can find grounding coming under the shelter of God's wings. And when they return back, Ruth, she gets on with life and works really hard, winnowing in the fields. And there's something about hard work, about routine at least, or regular exercise that's so helpful for us to avoid feeling down, to get out. For those of us that have no garden, to walk to the shop and feel the sun or the wind on our face does us good just to get out, as Ruth did. And then there's a lovely story, no time to look into it, really, but just to invite you to read it. The whole love story between her and an older man, a member of her family, a distant member of her family, who becomes the one who protects her. And in chapter 3, it's a lovely moment where Ruth, she declares her love for Boaz. as they grow to make their plans together. And Boaz has to work out paperwork, if you like, has to work out all the details. It was called a levirate marriage in those days, very common amongst the clan-based societies, where a couple could marry and the child was brought up as the child of the original family, so that the inheritance could stay and not be lost, so that Naomi would be protected. And in the moment where Boaz goes to deal with it, Naomi says a wonderful thing to Ruth. Chapter 3 and verse 18. Well, this is a whistle-stop tour, isn't it? Chapter 3 and verse 18. She says, "Sit still, my daughter. Wait, my daughter," she says. Chapter 3, verse 18. "Until you find out what happens, for that man, Boaz, the man you've come to love, he will not rest until the matter is settled today. Sit still. Don't fret. He will work it out." And I wonder if that's a word for you today. Maybe sadness has invaded your life. Maybe bereavement or the threat of loss, or you're feeling anxiety, and sometimes the news can really make us feel anxious, can't it? The word for you today, maybe, sit still, my daughter. Sit still, my son. And if we place ourselves in God's care, if we do what's right, then he'll never let us down. It doesn't mean everything will work out the way we want. It doesn't mean that everything will understand. We'll understand everything. But it means that we will always know his presence and his protection. Is it time maybe to let go, to let be? Many people are going through difficulties now. Many people are going through joys. But is there regret about the past? Is there worry about our present circumstances, often outside of our control? Fear about the future? Maybe some real concerns? Sit still, my daughter. Sit still, my son. For the Lord will not rest until he settles the matter. And then finish, they marry, and as Naomi welcomes the child, the lovely child, dandles him on her knee, the people say, "Naomi has a son." Wonderful, wonderful, to continue the line. And it's amazing that son, do you know who the son was? Ruth's son. Chapter 16 of verse 4. "Naomi took the child, laid him in her lap, cared for him, and the women living there said, 'Naomi has a son.'" There it is. "And they named him Obed. And his son was Jesse. And his son, David." David in Bethlehem. So do you see here, 1,000 years or so before Jesus was born, we're seeing something of the history of Bethlehem. And Ruth, this young Moabite, this foreigner, who originally was forbidden to come into the land of Israel and to enter the sanctuary. Here she is, welcomed into the family, becoming part of the ancestral line of the Lord Jesus. Don't count yourself outside of hope this morning. Don't count yourself as without hope. Welcome yourself into God's presence and be joyful that he's with you. And let me just share these verses from Amy Carmichael as we finish. "Before the winds that blow do cease, teach me to dwell within thy calm. Before the pain has passed in peace, give me, my God, to sing a psalm." Or in a modern version, the song that says, Matt Redman says, "Let me be singing when the evening comes. In the darkest time, we can still sing a song of joy." Have a good day today.